Hey guys, Fun from After Lens, and as you know, I recently traveled to Antarctica with the BMPCC 6K, and the question that I got asked the most was how did it go in the cold? So I thought I'd make a video about this. It's going to be a bit different than usual. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Q&A style video with the questions that you guys sent when I asked you guys a couple of weeks ago. So in this video I'm going to talk about the different locations that I've been to, which camera I use, the 4K, the 6K, and I'm also going to give you some tips on how to shoot in the cold or things that you can do to help. So let's get into it. So first of all, let's talk quickly about the destinations and the cameras that I've used. So the first one in France in winter with the BMPCC 4K, then in winter as well in New Zealand also with the BMPCC 4K, and then finally in Antarctica with the BMPCC 6K. So now about the temperatures. So in France it was about -2 to +10. I took the camera snowshoeing, I took the camera on top of a mountain, early morning for a drone session in the forest as well. In New Zealand it was more about -3 to 15 degrees. I took the camera at dawn on top of the mountain. I also took the camera hiking the very top of a snowy peak. It was very windy. In Antarctica the temperature ranged from anything from -5 to +10, but it was the wind that was very harsh, and it felt a lot colder than anywhere else. As you can see in Antarctic Visual Diaries as well, I got to experience all sorts of weather and I got to explore varied landscape and locations as well. So now let's get started with the question. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read the question and the name, and I apologize in advance if I'm butchering your names, and I'll just answer after that. So the first question is from J Quattro. How does the touchscreen respond in the cold, and what about issues with the lens or ND filters fogging up? So the touchscreen actually worked as normal even in sub-zero temperatures. There's no issue either with lenses fogging up, or I stayed outside mostly. I think it happened a few times when I was on the deck coming back inside, in and out of the observatory deck. So I was going from maybe like -5 to +25, so it did happen a few times, but I wasn't actually shooting inside, so it wasn't an issue. So the next question is from Tioman FPV. How do you power the camera? A custom external pack or a bunch of LP6 batteries? So for France and New Zealand, I actually used the internal small Canon ones. I think I used about 3 to 4 a day, and that was fine. For Antarctica though, I used the Core SWX Power Base Edge battery. So that gave me about 2.5 hours per charge. So the next question is from Hector Navarro. How does the cold affect the battery life? So the cold does affect the battery life. I can cut the battery of the small ones especially by half. I think when I was in Antarctica, a few times I've used the internal LP6 when I was on deck outside, and I think I only got like 25 minutes maybe as opposed to the 40 or 45 minutes that I usually get. On the original BMPCC when I was in Iceland and Greenland, I think, I remember one day the battery lasted for 10 minutes, so it's still better than that. For the Core SWX though, on a BMPCC 6K in Antarctica, I didn't notice any loss of energy. I think I still got 2.5 hours roughly, and I think you might get an extra like 10 or 20 minutes, but the cold didn't seem to affect it. I think it's just because it's such a bigger pack that it doesn't get cold as much. So the next question, actually it's not really a question, it's from Janmajay Singh. Shooting in the cold, setting up equipment in the weather and selection of equipment, plus tricks to deal with the cold. So it's more asking about tips. So here are a few tips. Tips number 1, wear gloves that have touchscreen compatible fingertips, so you can still use the screen or the menus and you're kind of warm as well. Second tips would be to wear layers, so you can quickly add or remove any piece of clothing when you're shooting, because you might run or move and then you might stop, so that will be helpful. Wear a jacket or any tops that does not make a lot of noise when you move around, because if you need to capture audio and you have everything kind of like rustling, it can actually just ruin the audio in some occasions. Turn the camera on and off as much as you can just to save battery. Keep the batteries close to your body. It could be in a pocket like here for example. It could be in your hand if you are able to, you know, walk around just with a battery. It could be in a pouch as well that you store in a backpack. But make sure they're just not like out or like flying in a bag or whatever, because if you put your bag on the ground then you might get really cold at the bottom. things like that. So make sure to keep the batteries covered by a couple of layers at least. Try to control your body shakes, and that might sound a bit weird, but if you can kneel down, that would actually help. That's what I do a lot. I think I spend like half of my time in Antarctica just laying on the ground, just because it helps me being more stable. And you do get micro shakes when you don't move for like a couple of hours, like in the snow. So that helps a lot. Don't forget to breathe as well, to control your breathing, because when you get cold and when you start getting cold, you kind of start shaking and it makes it really obvious on the camera. I will also say to use weather sealed lenses. So even if your camera like the BMPCC 6K is not weather sealed, having a lens that's weather sealed will protect the mount of the camera at least. Guy Bartov asks, I would like to know how well is it for outdoor shoots in the nature, moisture, dust, rain, temperature wise, thanks. So I shot in the snow with the 6K and the camera got wet really quickly. I wouldn't recommend it. That's why I have the EOS R as a backup camera for video when things like that happened. The vents on the top here on the BMPCC 6K and 4K are quite big, so if you have a lot of rain and snow coming through this, you can actually ruin the sensor or the camera pretty quickly, so I wouldn't do that. Obviously sometimes you get caught in the moment. It's what happened to me in Antarctica, as you saw on some of the vlogs. The snow was quite heavy, it was coming at me, and I think I was shooting for maybe 10 minutes and I was like, nah, I need to stop because it's too risky. Cold temperature is fine. It didn't seem to affect the camera, but avoid rain and snow. When it comes to dust, I haven't really shot in a dust environment yet. I did shoot on the beach one morning and it was extremely windy and some sand kind of hit the camera from all angles, and I did find some sand not inside the camera, but that was just kind of like hanging between the vents, so I wouldn't recommend that. If you need to shoot near the beach, make sure that your back is facing the wind or that your camera is somehow protected. Also, I was wondering if being in Antarctica or any other location with a 4K or the 6K, if shooting constantly obviously keeps the camera quite warm, if that helped in any way. I would say just be very careful with those cameras. They're not weather sealed. If you need to shoot in situations like this constantly, that's probably not the camera for you. Or you can do like what I do, which is to have a small backup like the EOS R that's weather sealed, and for some reason if there's rain or snow on it, or even if I drop it in the snow for some reason, it would still be fine. This lens, for example, is one of the lenses that I used in Antarctica and in New Zealand. No, just in Antarctica, sorry, and in France. 16-35 f4 IS. Quite small and seems to be performing really well in the cold as well. Most of the shots that you saw in Antarctica were either on the 16-35, the 24-105 or the 70-200, which are pretty much the same lenses when it comes to aperture, IS and build quality. Next is Matt with a hat, and the question is, how is it trying to operate with gloves and loads of gear on? Looking at filming in -30 degrees, do you use a shoulder rig? As always, I try to be as nimble as possible, so I didn't use a shoulder rig in Antarctica or any other cold locations that I've been shooting at. I shoot handheld because I usually move a lot for doco work. I would use a tripod though if you know that you're going to be in the same spot, or if you have a car, maybe just put a tripod, put your camera on, and that way you might be able to actually keep yourself warm by putting your hands in your pocket, because when I was in Antarctica I had my hands on the camera for 3 hours at a time in sub-zero temperatures, so you do get cold really quickly. I was born in the French Alps and I ski a lot, so I'm wondering if maybe that helps. I don't seem to get that cold when I'm shooting. I'm kind of like really focused, and then when the shoot is done, that's when I start getting really cold, start getting tired, start needing to go to the toilet. But when I'm shooting, I'm usually 100% in the shoot and I don't seem to be very much impacted by the outside environment. As I mentioned before, I've used glove with touchscreen compatible fingertips, so you can still use the screen and at least you're still a bit warm, but I don't know for -30 if that's gonna cut it. Maybe get a pair of actual like proper big winter gloves and try to put them on as much as you can, but you won't be able to use the screen. So you can still use the buttons on top of the camera, I guess, but I would use at least on the left hand, if you're, depending what hand you use, but on my left hand I would use a bigger glove, and on the right hand I would use a merino glove with fingertips. So the next question is by Zaya Serentok. It's not really about shooting in the cold, but I'm wondering, how do you choose aperture when you want everything in focus, like mountains, etc.? Do you use f4 or 5.6 or anything you prefer mostly? I think, as I've said before, I've used, mostly for people, I use 2.8 to f4. But when it comes to landscape, I use anything from f4 to f11. That depends on the light that's available, if I can actually see where the focus is, because when you're shooting in a cold, for example, it's really hard sometimes to know where your focus actually is. Like if you have a field of snow, shooting at 11 is going to be a lot easier than shooting at f4 if you can. So the last question is from Becca Media Company. The camera isn't weather sealed, but you have obviously put it through its paces. Do you ever feel like it was failing with moisture? Not at all. I've never had any issue. I've been really careful not to use it in the rain, as I said before, but I have yet to shoot in a very humid or hot environment. I remember being in Dubai a few years ago with the original Pocket, and that's probably the most humid places that I've ever been to. Actually, it was Abu Dhabi. It was very, very humid. I think it was about 44, 45 degrees, and humidity was like 97%, and the small BMPCC was actually drenched. I remember having issues holding it in my hand, and that would perform fine, but it also doesn't have any vent or any the same of the air intake. So I'm not sure if you're holding the camera and things get hot on this one. Maybe it would be okay, and the screen on the back is quite big though, so I'm not sure with like condensation if that would have a major impact or not. So here you have it, guys. I hope this was helpful to you. I've tried to cover pretty much everything that was related to cold shooting without going too much into details on other aspects, but don't hesitate to ask any questions. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.